But for the sake of this video, I just want to defend this idea that the Trinity is an essential doctrine, that it's okay to see this as setting the parameters of what Christianity is.
It is that important. And this is kind of the witness of the church down through the centuries. The Trinity really is that important. And when you distort that or dismiss that or minimize that, you will make your gospel no gospel at all.
I don't think that it's necessarily essential to salvation, however. For example, I think that Abraham and Moses will be in heaven. They were saved, but they didn't believe the doctrine of the Trinity.
Hey kids, Hailstorm here. Love you, miss you, and I got a fun one for you tonight. Now, you're not old enough yet to understand, but someday you will be. And for me, it was at a Jamba Juice during a rainstorm when I was 16 years old, still feels like yesterday, where I learned that questioning the Trinity feels kind of like trying to cancel a gym membership. It's taxing, it's tiring, there's going to be harassment involved, and somehow everyone ends up in worse shape. Now, people will fight you over it like they're defending their life savings, because in a way, they are. Now, this is a video of Ruslan, who is a rich man's Mike Winger. He's covering a video Gavin Ortlund did about Alex and Jacob Hansen having their conversation after the Jubilee video. Now, when I watch it, I really just want to make a video going through every silly and absurd thing that Ruslan said, especially about members of the LDS faith and their beliefs. I did it with Wes Huff when he went on Joe Rogan, so I don't know where the link's going to be because I'm in the corner here, but I'm going to put some links up if you want to check those out, and you should. But instead, in this video, I'm going to try to stay a little more focused and narrow it down to two key takeaways that come out of this video, which I think are going to help you see and explain things differently than most people do when they encounter this. Now, in part one, I'm going to focus primarily on the theological Stockholm syndrome known as the Trinity. And that's what I'm going to call this video. Some of you are freaking out like the guy in Dumb and Dumber. Tic-tac, sir? Because you can't handle it. And that's the point of the video. The best part, the victims of theological Stockholm syndrome, known as the Trinity, are going to make their case for us in this video, unwittingly. I'm just going to point out how sunk cost works. So, up to this point, because we're fast forwarding a little bit, two main things have happened. One, Ruslan and his sidekick Steve, whose name I don't know, pretend to forget that Alex trolled them about the LDS faith being the one they would pick if they were forced to pick a denomination. That's pretty funny. And number two, Jacob Hansen, who you see here, was praised by Ruslan for absolutely beating up on Trent Horn in their first and probably last public debate. Now, you can click here for my video about why Catholics do not bring Mormon apologists onto their platforms if you didn't see the debate, but I suspect it should be pretty obvious why if you saw it.
The great Christological debates were never resolved. Instead, a particular take on the Christological debates was enforced. In other words...
Hold on. What the councils were about? Enforced. The councils were literally about, we're going to resolve this, and we're going to get the Arians out, right? So that's a funny claim. Okay, go ahead.
We're going to get the Arians out. That's going to be a theme. Hang on to that one.
If you were outside of the orthodoxy of the official church of the Roman Empire, the official religion, then you were a heretic, not just in a vague sense, like you were against the official church. And this creedal tradition, it didn't really spread because it just like made so much sense. It wasn't like, they went to people and were like, oh, hypostatic union. There's like, that makes total sense. Like Trinity, like perfect. The reason that it spread was because it was the official religion of governments that for 1,500 years had adopted this sort of creedal tradition as their official like orthodoxy. And then as they expand, well, this is our religion. For essentially for 1,500 years, this creedal tradition spreads around the world and is enforced through the state.
Pause it. Now, I think it's ironic, the conclusions of this, because this suggests a great apostasy, which, by the way, Protestants don't believe in. We don't believe that the entire church apostatized until Martin Luther came on the scene and fixed it all. Come on.
You kind of do, though. I mean, if you're Protestant, you believe that they were apostatizing and that it had to be fixed or reformed. You kind of do.
That's what they believe.
The Mormons believe.
They believe that there's a great falling away, a great apostasy.
Until Joseph Smith.
So Joseph Smith
who was
figured it all out.
prophesied in the end of Genesis.
The end of Genesis, that's right, Genesis 50. He wrote himself in, connecting himself to Joseph.
Wow.
And Joseph set the record straight. He cleaned it all up for everybody.
And it's funny because to this day, it's still not enforced through argument. It's enforced through sort of social pressure. For example, you were on Ruslan's podcast, and as soon as you mention Latter-day Saints, what's the first thing he says? He says they're not Christian.
Mormonism, of course.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing.
We don't consider them Christians. Give me another one.
No, well, that's
The first thing I said is I laughed at Alex O'Connor's answer that is the stream of Christianity he would have
That's not saying a thing. That's laughing.
picked.
Yeah. Why did he pick that? What
Because
was
he
his-
wanted to troll.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Ah, that's amazing.
We don't consider them Christians. Give me another one.
no, well, that's is for this kind of and theological ideas, and it's different idea about like what God is and all of this kind of stuff, and the history of persecution of Mormons in the United States is pretty amazing too. You know, like there's so much really interesting stuff. The extermination order of Missouri, where like people were told to just kill them. You know, like it's an unbelievable history.
So I don't think I jumped out the window and said they're not saved. I think they follow a different Jesus.
Okay. What he's doing is he's saying, why aren't we Christian? You want to know why he say we're not Christian? It's not because we don't accept the New Testament or believe that Jesus rose from the dead. It's because we don't accept the Trinitarian formulation of God.
Did I say
Which
that?
No, he's assuming why.
He's assuming why. Okay.
Yeah, he's saying,
well,
why,
yes.
why do...
But yes, that is kind of what I was saying.
Did I say that?
No, he's assuming why.
He's assuming why. Okay.
Yeah, he's saying,
well,
why,
yes.
why all of Christians say that we're not Christian?
I think there's a lot of reasons why you guys aren't Christians. Respect.
Oh, okay. Yeah, respect and love. So let's go over what's on more. Just throw out like the main ones and we'll categorize them. Here we go.
I love you guys. There's a lot of reasons. There's the forgered, translated Egyptian tablets that were debunked by every single person who had studied Egyptian.
That's not just a really stupid and ignorant thing to say. Like he doesn't know anything about Charles Anthon, who was the expert Egyptologist. He was the Brad Pitt of Egyptologists at the time, who actually had the exact opposite reaction and then folded under social pressure. You can see why it's Stockholm Syndrome. You can't list a biblical reason why. You can't even list a creedal reason why. You just list this opinion you have that happens to be incorrect and why that's a discount. That's stupid. That's Stockholm Syndrome.
When they were finally allowed people to see them, I think it's because Joseph Smith wrote himself into the book of Genesis.
All right. If I was going to take more time to do this, I'd make 3 categories, right? I have one column that says biblical reasons. I'd have a second column that says creedal reasons. And I have a third column that says evidence that I'm a prophet. So far, the first 2 are evidence that this man had special gifts that no one else had. They're not biblical arguments. They're not creedal arguments. They're cope arguments for someone who had gifts from God. You don't believe them, but that's what they are. This is Stockholm Syndrome. I feel like Jeff Goldblum. That's chaos.
See, here I'm now by myself talking to myself. That's chaos.
I think because these tablets that there were eyewitnesses for, no one actually could read these tablets.
Prophet column.
Except Joseph Smith,
Okay.
who was all kinds of a complicated person in his own right. So I think there's a lot of reasons to say that they don't follow the same Jesus.
I rest my case, Your Honor.
Which is demonstrably a formulation that came through the creeds centuries after Christ.
Now, this is a very common narrative that you will hear, not just from Mormons, but from many others as well. So I wanted to say a few words to defend the doctrine of the Trinity, primarily because I know a lot of Christians who have anxieties and uncertainties about this. It's true that in 3...
Did you hear what he just said? Gavin, this guy's great. I actually have seen him a lot. Very smart, very calm, very measured, very smart. But when he starts defending it by putting out the disclaimer, I know a lot of you have concerns and anxieties about this. It makes me laugh. There's what line did I say once? The Trinity, because nothing says God is simple, like a paradox that requires a doctorate in theology to explain. And that's what we're going to see here.
And you've heard of St. Augustine. You know what he said about the Trinity? He said the Trinity is like the ocean. He said a baby can sit right on the edge on the sand and play and splash the water and do great. But he said, if you go out too far, you'll drown. He said, that's what the doctrine of the Trinity is. He said, it's so deep, it's so hard to understand. Just stay right on the shore where you understand what it's saying.
Hang on to your hats and keep the theme in mind. Theological Stockholm Syndrome.
Primarily because I know a lot of Christians who have anxieties and uncertainties about this. It's true that in 380, you have the Edict of Thessalonica, where Nicene Christianity becomes the Roman Empire's official religion under Emperor Theodosius and others. And then a year later, you have the Council of Constantinople with the revised Nicene Creed. And if you can pronounce the phrase, the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed, can't believe I got it right. So starting in the 4th century, Nicene Christianity has a kind of imperial backing. And that will be true for all the doctrines in the Nicene Creed, the virgin birth, for example, or the doctrine of the resurrection of the dead, for example. All of these doctrines are kind of now interwoven with imperial politics.
Which is exactly the case that Mr. Hansen was making.
Falsify them, that also doesn't validate them. You might believe both, that Jesus was born of a virgin, and that belief now becomes interwoven with Roman Empire politics.
That's kind of a slick sleight of hand right there, where there's some things that are true that are obviously the government's behind them, so it doesn't mean they're true or not true, but we're talking about the Trinity specifically.
And you can...
And just because something was decriminalized, that doesn't mean that it was instantly appropriated for political means.
Kids, I say this all the time. You got to watch the wording. Just because something was decriminalized, which is a cute way of saying just because the government force went behind these beliefs, supported them, and tried to unify people of all faiths around this unified doctrine that they decided on, doesn't mean they were, what did he say?
It doesn't mean that it was instantly appropriate.
Instantly appropriate. No, it wasn't instant. That's the whole point.
The Trinitarian tradition spread going forward for the next 1,500 years.
Stockholm syndrome doesn't happen when the bank robber and the kidnapper walk in. It takes time. It takes time to condition them to their new environment.
For political means.
Come on.
Right? That's also a fallacy. Go ahead.
Believe that about the Trinity. You can believe it's true and it's interwoven with the politics now. But the reason why the Trinitarian tradition spread going forward for the next 1,500 years was not just politics and social pressure. And I think that's very unfair.
Not just politics and social pressure. There's other things too. All right, I like that admission. He's being honest. Gets good. Watch this.
But another way you can see is even in the medieval era, just the courage of missionaries who are advancing the doctrine of the Trinity into other contexts at their own great peril. One of my great interests in my academic work is the Christianization of Scandinavia in the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries. I just talked about this at church yesterday, so it's fresh on my mind because I'm doing a seminar in church history we're going through, and I have a video on this if you're interested in that. I know it seems kind of a niche topic, but it's actually fascinating. The courage of these men going up to the Vikings and just getting slaughtered for about 250 years before Christianity really took root is just amazing. You know, there are these stories. I'll put up one on the screen. You can read.
Certain English man named Wilfred, inspired by divine love, and entered Sweden with great courage, preached the word of God to the pagans, and as by his preaching, he converted many to the Christian faith. He proceeded to anathemize a popular idol named Thor, which stood in the things of the pagans, and at the time he seized a battle axe and broke the image to pieces.
Okay, let's look at the pattern they're shelling out for us here. We're talking about the courage and daring of missionaries who went to a foreign land, to this place where they tried to anathematize a popular idol named Thor. Well, how did we get Thor, the popular idol? I'm not a Norwegian historian, but I bet it aligns pretty closely with what Gavin said earlier about the fact that you had the way the Trinity spread, right? You have this political pressure, this expediency, this force behind it. Isn't that how they got Thor?
The Trinitarian tradition spread going forward for the next 1,500 years.
Did that happen instantly, as Ruslan said? No, it happens over time. Stockholm syndrome. You believe in this God because it's been popularized over time and it's been built and woven into your culture, and now he's the subject of your divine worship. What does this have to do with the Trinity? Watch what happens to people who anathematize their God.
This man is destroying their idols. That's kind of gangster. And forthwith he was pierced with 1,000 wounds for such daring, and his soul passed into heaven, earning a martyr's laurels. His body was mangled by the barbarians, and after being subjected to much mockery, was plunged into a swamp. Whew.
Okay, I wanted to let that run through so you could hear their arguments for how important, how crucial it was for them to spread this doctrine of the Trinity. And they're talking about Christian missionaries being mangled. I don't know if they crossed swords or if they fought back, but obviously this is very important to them. I just find the language interesting. Listen to this again.
This is from Adam of Bremen's account of Wolfrid smashing statues of Thor with the battle axe to show that the Trinity is the real God, not Thor. And
the Trinity is the real God. I have to steal a line from Jared Halverson, which I thought was fantastic. We don't believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. We believe in the members of the Trinity. So the point I'm making here is when you have enough sunk cost, I'm arguing he's making the case. Look at the amount of emotional, intellectual investment, the significant time, effort, and resources devoted to the Trinity. And the visceral reaction now we have when you say, hey, I don't really believe in the Trinity anymore. And I want to give you some examples. If these guys are going to disagree that it wasn't political pressure or the other things they already admitted that it was, and then talk about how much time, blood, treasure they've invested in this message, then I think we have to take that in consideration why we have the reaction that they do. So I want to give a couple examples. Trinity arguments, Trinity historical facts, some things you really should be aware of. So kids, once established as orthodoxy, Trinity became a foundational pillar of Christian belief, making its rejection a fundamental challenge to Christian identity. Do you see that today? Do they identify as Trinity? Do they take it as a personal offense if you say you don't believe in that? The Roman Empire's backing of Nicene Christianity via the Edict of Thessalonica, which he mentioned in 380 AD, meant that rejecting the Trinity was not just theological dissent, but also political rebellion. Not good. You don't want to rebel against the Romans. The Catholic Church and later Protestant groups inherited this institutional commitment, making denial of the Trinity not just heresy, but an existential threat to the Church's authority. Do you see that today when you say something bad about the Trinity? LGB Trinity. Heretics and non-Trinitarian groups, examples, Arian Christians, early Unitarians, Socinians, face persecution, exile, or execution. The execution of Michael Servetus in 1553 for denying the Trinity is a key example of the extreme lengths to which Christian institutions would go to protect this doctrine. I purposely skipped 1,000 years in the future so you could see that this did not happen instantly. As Ruslan said, it took a while, and over time, they took more drastic measures to protect their sunk cost investment in this doctrine. It's probably worth noting here that Servetus was condemned to death by both John Calvin and Martin Luther. What were his crimes? There were 2 counts of spreading and preaching non-Trinitarianism and anti-paedo baptism, better known as infant baptism. Servetus's last recorded words as he was burned alive on top of a pyre of his own writings were, "Jesus, Son of the eternal God, have mercy on me." It is recorded that other anti-Trinitarian thinkers began to be much more cautious in expressing their views. And the blood, treasure, and lives they'd lost spreading this doctrine across the world, as Dr. Ortlund points out. There was a joke in here where he said that Michael Servetus is reading just imagine Michael Servetus reading the Bible and saying, guys, interesting, I don't see this anywhere, this Trinity. And the response was, not crickets, bonfire noises. His friend Sebastian Castellio, 1515 to 1563, was not executed, but was driven out of Geneva for not denying the Trinity. So even today, challenging the Trinity in Christian circles often leads to exclusion, excommunication, or intense apologetic pushback, which is why I find ironic that as soon as Alex trolled them, what did Ruslan say? Oh, we don't consider them Christian. That is the Trinitarian conception, doctrine, legacy. That is what I mean by theological Stockholm syndrome. They have come to love this oppressive doctrine so much that saying that it's done harm to them, saying that it's damaged them, saying that it's not correct, means you're the bad guy, not the kidnapper, not the thief, not the person holding you hostage, the person trying to rescue you from the doctrine. What's the other problem? Theological institutions, seminaries, and church structures have way too much invested in Trinitarian doctrine to allow for open questioning without major upheaval. I'm going to give you a couple more examples. Priscillian of Avila, executed in 385. Priscillian was a bishop in Roman Spain, accused of heresy, including deviations from Trinitarian orthodoxy. He and his followers were condemned by church authorities and executed by the Roman state. It was the first recorded execution of a Christian by other Christians for heresy, 385 AD. What happened right before that? Oh, I know. They did an edict of Thessalonica 5 years earlier. They took this stuff pretty serious. They did not like to be told they were wrong. So yeah, Ruslan says, hey, they had these councils and they figured that out. They had dozens of councils over the course of centuries, and they never figured it out. What they did, like he said, is they got rid of those Arians. They got them out of there. They didn't want to hear what they had to say.
Instead, a particular take on the Christological debates was enforced. In other words,
hold on. What the councils were about? Enforced. The councils were literally about we're going to resolve this and we're going to get the Arians out, right? So that's a funny claim. Okay, go ahead.
Speaking of Arians, many Arian bishops and theologians were exiled and their writings were burned. Nobody was allowed to read them. They were that bad. Fausto Sozzini, 1539 to 1604, and the Polish Brethren. Sozzini, the founder of Socinianism, rejected the Trinity and he was forced to what? Flee Italy. His followers, the Polish Brethren, were eventually expelled from Poland in 1658. Thomas Aikenhead, a 20-year-old Scottish student convicted of blasphemy and hanged for what? Denying the Trinity. His case was one of the last executions for blasphemy in Britain. hung for blasphemy. 20 years old. Joseph Priestley, 1804, a scientist and theologian. He was a Unitarian who denied the Trinity. His home and church were burned to the ground in the Birmingham riots of 1791. Now, there's myriad more examples of this, kids, but the important thing is to know when you get pushback from someone, when you critique or even question the Trinity, the reason they're doing this is because there's a 1,500-year legacy of Stockholm Syndrome saying this golden calf is too important to slay. It's too important to mock, and if anyone doesn't align with it, they are not a Christian. Now, these cases demonstrate the Trinity was not just a theological doctrine, but a deeply entrenched political and social issue that people were willing to kill over. And they're still willing to kill today. This is part one. Part two is about a man named Joseph Smith who was killed for telling people the Trinity is not correct. And to this day, people who believe that he was a prophet are told they're not Christians. It just so happens they're peak Christians, living the gospel as God intended, but don't let overwhelming evidence and a bounteous harvest of fruit get in the way of a good narrative. Now, as you know, it wouldn't be a proper Hailstorm video if I didn't tie it back to my favorite theme, which is spiritually blue-pilled, politically red-pilled. And I was told by a friend I need to do a video more in depth on just that, but I'm going to finish it off this way. If you hear, yeah, but you're not Christian because you don't believe in the Trinity, if you're seeing this theological Stockholm Syndrome in action, you can relate that to analogies in politics you see all the time. When you see a blue-pilled person talking about economic policies, what do they say? The rich don't pay their fair share. Socialism, it's never really been tried. You can give them all the evidence in the world that those things are not true, but they are holding on to that carefully crafted cope narrative to make sure they don't have to confront a grim reality, which is that their worldview is wrong. And that's what happens when you criticize the Trinity. You don't believe me? Let's look at crime and law enforcement. When you hear someone say, defund the police, make communities safer, you kind of laugh and go, how did we get here? Gun-free zones, prevent violence, social issues, gender as a social construct. Men can get pregnant too. Hilarious. Immigration, no person is illegal. America was built by immigrants. Media, censorship, misinformation is dangerous and must be stopped. If you have nothing to worry about, then don't worry about surveillance because you have nothing to hide. And religiously, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you are not a Christian. They're all the same thing. It's all McDonald's. So kids, I'm going to leave you with two parting thoughts. The first one is that Thor Trinity analogy. Which God is superior? That's huge, right? So if you hear Thor, you're watching Disney movies, or you hear Trinity and someone recoils and says, how could you criticize the Trinity? You're not Christian. Just remember, criticizing the Trinity gets you the same treatment as criticizing Thor. What did it say? Forthwith, you'll be pierced with 1,000 wounds for such daring, and your soul will pass into heaven, and earning a martyr's laurels. You are not allowed to criticize the Trinity because they replaced Thor with the Trinity. And you try to replace the Trinity with a more correct understanding of the Godhead, you will pay a price. Your body will be mangled. Today, maybe not your body, but your character, your beliefs, your lifestyle will be mangled by the barbarians, and after being subjected to much mockery, will be plunged into the swamp. Jesus Christ may have ascended to his Father, but the spirit of the scribes and Pharisees lives on. Number two, if there was, people talk about cults all the time now. You're in a cult, everyone's in a cult. But if there was a cult, a Fight Club cult for Trinitarians, the first rule of Fight Club would be never ask questions about the Trinity. And the second would be like unto it. Seriously, you ask one more question about the Trinity and we'll kill you in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
This is the way.